same as the Ghost, but the principle is pretty close, pretty much the same. It's got what's called an extra air valve on it. This was something Henry Royce designed. It works on somewhat the same principle as an SU, whereas an SU raises a needle to provide more gasoline or fuel, and this actually opens up, so that causes it to be richer. This is an extra air valve. It opens up and causes it to be leaner. So Henry Royce did everything backwards. Everybody else puts a choke on a car to start it to make it richer by choking off the air. What did Henry Royce do? He added a second carburetor, which is an enricher. He wanted more fuel, not less air. He was a Martian. Everything he did was backwards from normal thinking.
What was his thinking on that?
Well, there wasn't a thinking at the time, and he was not an automotive engineer. He learned engineering as what engineering he learned professionally as a apprentice at the rail yards, so steam trains. And then he couldn't afford his apprenticeship anymore, because back then you actually paid to work for the rail yards and learn.
The big joke about, you can have any color you want as long as it's black, is when the Model T first came out, the first few years, you could actually get a bunch of different colors. But it was slowing production down.
Because black was the fastest drying color.
Paint, so that's why he switched to all black.
Minutes. So he was big into time motion studies and to efficiency improvements. You remove one watt. So one of the first things we always inspect or check with a Royce carburetor is the extra air valve. Your Ghost is the same thing. And with the top on, you want to see about that. It's about a second and a half drop time, plus it's dropping all the way to the bottom. That's controlled by a spring. And we want to see the spring. That spring's sagged a little bit. It's almost touching. But we want to see the spring. Spring doesn't do any good if it's not touching and controlling things. There's almost. And you notice it's not sitting perfectly flat, so I'm going to bend in a slightly different direction. Yep. See, now it's sitting up just a little bit, so there's a little bit of compression on the spring. Now it still won't, your drop time is like that until this goes on, and now you have vacuum. There's another little control area here, which if it starts dropping too fast, you can take it, you see the three little drillings right there? Those are vacuum, those are actually holes that let vacuum through. So as your lands start to wear and it starts to drop too fast, you can take a tiny little drop of epoxy and cover up one of those holes. Or if you put new lands on it and relap it together, you can drill another hole until you get your timing just exactly right. So those holes are there from the factory. Those tiny little holes, and that's how the guy that built the carburetors final timed the carburetor. And woe betide the guy who looks and goes, "That's got holes in it. Let's just
seal those up,
solder those up." But this is in perfectly good shape. This is called the penny washer. That also has a height set on it. It has to be able to move. It works on a pivot right here. And the penny washer, if you look down in the carb, when we take it apart, you'll see it. But there's a thing called the tulip, okay? So the tulip this was Royce's big innovation. So it goes like this, and then it's got a little notch at the bottom. And he calculated more or less in his head. So the penny washer, when the car is stopped, sits right there. As soon as you start the car, it moves up and should move to about even there. And there's just enough air to keep it idling, okay? It's being lifted up by vacuum, because vacuum is coming up through the through this hollow tube right up here, up into the carb through these holes here, right? And then that is pulling it upwards, and that's open to the air. So vacuum coming in here is lifting that piston up inside of its housing. As the vacuum lifts it up, what you're getting is more air, a lot more air, because this is a parabolic curve right here. And so you're getting a square relationship, or a square or a cube relationship of how much air is getting in. Right, the higher it gets.
So this feeds off into the inlet manifold then, does it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is pulling through here, and this is the air that's coming up. So the tulip, when we get this apart, the tulip is where the jet is. So your jet is exactly located in here, and that's right in the center of the venturi, where the gas is its fastest, and that's now what creates your vapor, not vapor, you don't want vapor, you want atomization, a stoichiometric ratio. Long word, but stoichiometric ratio is the exact ratio of fuel and air for the most efficient combustion.
Is it 14 point lambda? Is it called lambda? Do they call it?
It's
like a lambda sensor.
It's math, and you wave a wand. And
there you go.
Happens,
yes,
right.
That's pi r squared or something.
That's what physicists are for. I just assume them. Right.
So, but fundamentally, you're drawing air across a fuel supply, which then sucks the fuel in and vaporizes it into the air stream.
Remember the Venturi principle. Air is going to move fastest at the narrowest point. So you put your jet at the narrowest point, and as the airflow comes past it, it's going to pull fuel out of that jet and atomize it. And when you see the jet and the jet tube. By the way, to put it into perspective, a gallon of gasoline in a perfect stoichiometric ratio has ungodly power. It's the equivalent of several thousand pounds of TNT. If you remember the mother of all bombs, the great videos of the Moabs or the fuel air explosives. So it's like the biggest your float is exactly the same height as the height of the fuel at the top of your jet. If your float isn't working, or if you're using an SU fuel pump and overpowering your float, it's going to come flowing out of here all the time and run out the bottom of your carburetor, or if it's really bad, it's just going to absolutely flow out of everything. And then that is closed. Okay, that's a perfect jet, fully closed. But when you're setting an idle or whatever, it raises up just enough to create a tiny gap. So you can see a big gap right there. But as it comes down, it's no gap or a tiny gap. When you are adjusting your mixture, what you're doing, you see that's going up and down, not by much. That's 14 threads per inch, and your rotation is only about 30 degrees. So you can figure 30 degrees divided by 14 divided by 1 inch, whatever it is. So a third of 1/14 of 1 inch is the amount it's going to move. It's not, it's not much.
Down to 30 seconds. Yes.
But again, that's a taper, right? And so moving a taper not much becomes again a square relationship. So if your hole is this big, right, with this being the gap that the fuel can come through, and you move a taper just a little bit and it does that, well, that's only half the square area of that is, but it doesn't take very much to get to reducing it.
So the profile of that needle then, that shaft, is precisely machined to match the profile of the characteristics of the engine.
Correct. Correct.
Which is
and
it's like
and the threads are matched
Right.
to raise it the precise amount to meter the exact amount of fuel you want.
at that point
And
in
so
time, yeah,
that's why
yeah.
this is your mixture control, which you set on the steering wheel, and you don't generally mess with it much.
Yeah.
There are reasons to mess with it while driving, but there's not really many reasons to mess with it. But what you're doing is making it richer or leaner, right? Leaner, it closes down.
Yeah.
There's less gap. Richer, the taper's coming up. There's more gap. So, and you've got two jets doing this. You've got a low speed and a high speed. Low speed is idle and up to sort of 5 miles an hour, and then the high speed kicks in, and the fuel now starts moving through the high-speed jet as the extra air valve lifts.
So the high-speed jet augments the low-speed jet. Together they've
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right. So if you don't get the first one right, it's never going to be right.
And most of the time, so as this opens up, the amount of airflow across the low-speed jet is going to decrease because your airflow isn't going across it. The extra air valve is opening.
Right.
And now it's bringing that air in. So the high-speed jet kind of takes over from the low-speed jet, but they are both operating. And at idle, the high-speed jet's basically doing nothing,
Yeah.
and everything's coming with the low-speed jet. So when you're tuning at idle, the only thing you need to touch is the low-speed jet until it dials in. And then the only way to tune the high-speed jet is to drive down the road. And there's some tips and tricks, and there's some ways to tune the high-speed jet if you're brave enough in your garage, but you got to run the thing up to really pretty high RPM and work the knob. It's much easier to do it under load down the road, and I'll kind of go through how how that works. What goes wrong with these? Well, not much. I mean, these jets will last hundreds of thousands of miles. They only thing really that causes wear is fuel getting sucked through. You've got liquid. Liquid doesn't erode brass. Good dirt in liquid erodes brass. So you get rusty, cruddy fuel. You get sand in it. You get stuff that's nasty. Now you've got a water jet cutter, essentially, right? Abrasives in a liquid.
Unless you have a fuel filter. Would that,
Fuel filter helps,
Yeah.
I mean, anything to keep crud and impurities out. But we're not talking about, a few weeks. That there's no adjusting that. That's screwed up like a. But you lift the jet a few times.
What were you lifting here?
Well, if you lift this.
Okay, just that. Okay.
Yeah. All you're doing there is making this.
Is this like this is a spring loaded?
Yeah, little spring.
Do
Yeah.
that while it's running?
And
or
it's
what?
got when it's running, and all you're gonna do is like boop, 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 boop,
To
boop.
loosen like that.
And if there's any dirt in there, it usually flushes out because the dirt gets stuck. Dirt can get stuck like there. You open it up and make it bigger, and the dirt just flies up into your stream and
now,
it's
why did
gone.
Paul's thing get bent? And that's why we sent it to you.
The only way they get bent is if you assemble the carburetor and do that.
You didn't do it wrong.
And do it wrong. Once it's in and nice and straight, it doesn't get
Sure.
bent.
So that's
you
human
can't-
intervention then, is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, human error. There are no bad carburetors. There are just bad owners.
Yeah.
So,
Are there two of those?
yes, a high speed and a low speed, and as we mentioned earlier, they're sort of so.
So would you say this is like the most delicate aspect of the carburetor in terms of precision?
Yeah, it's pretty. Again, once you put it up. So again, here's lifting. You see how it lifts like that? It's delicate in terms of if you put it together as you know what it stands for, right? Seldom understood. So here are our these are our adjustment screws, the ones that you should never need to adjust. high-speed jet, unlike the low-speed jet, has a spring controlling it underneath. And when I get this all off, fuel pump, the fuel never comes above the jet level. The fuel level is down here. So you're not sealing anything. Tight. That's tight. And then that locks in place and keeps it from coming off. Maybe could go one more tooth, but you don't put a wrench on there and tighten it. And someone has.
And the P1's the same thing. You don't, even though it doesn't have a locking thing, you just snug it. You don't.
You just snug it, right?
Okay.
Yep. Because again, there should be no reason for fuel to get up there.
Gotcha.
You're not creating a sealed chamber. You are merely creating a cover. But of course, it's not just a cover because
You have those levers that have to.
because right there's the float height. Now, one of the things that does happen over time, you see the floats here. See those shiny spots right there? Those float arms have wear on them, where they've worn against the top of the float for decades. And when you have wear on the top of a float, you don't have perfect and you don't have perfect action. You end up with sort of a cam action, right? Instead of being nice and round, it comes up and it lifts it very suddenly. So you can buy new levers from Fines, or you can very carefully take a stone and just or a file and just clean those flat spots off. I'll pass that around. You can see the flat spots. We have our float. Delicate as could be. If you put one of these in a bead blaster to try and clean it up, you'll blow it apart in about 1 second. Never abrasive, clean. You can test these simply by putting them in hot water. If they start to bubble, get it out of the hot water, but the hot water will cause the air inside to expand. The expansion will push bubbles out, get it out of the water as quick as possible. Otherwise, you won't blow it out, but you'll suck water in it, and then it's a pain to get the water out before you solder it up. Also, give a listen. You hear the little rattle in there?
There is in there?
There's a little rattle in there. Perfectly normal and perfectly good. That's a little tiny drop of solder that when they assembled it in the first place, probably fell down inside it, and that tells you it's dry inside. If you hear sloshing, well, that's a sign that your float has cracked or has
Got liquid in it.
and you've got to pump that liquid out, and there's a trick to that, and then resolder it and reseal it. And you want to be very careful how much solder you use, because you don't want to add extra weight to the float. That said, you can still adjust things, but you want to keep the weight as it should be. By the way, on the Ghosts, Rolls-Royce had multiple floats because not everybody ran gasoline. Some countries, especially like in Denmark and Sweden, soldered in place. See the solder on there, but moving that up or down, if you move it, whichever direction you move it in, it's going to change when it closes the needle. So if you move the collar up, the needle's going to close sooner, and your float height's going to be lower. Now you might want to lower your float height because it's leaking, but if you lower your float height and now your gasoline is down there in the tubes, you're never going to pull gas out of it, because if the gas isn't up near the top, it won't pull easily. If the gas is over the top, it's the top
That's
where
where that's
it's,
rubbing it. But if you get a brand new float, that has like a little,
I don't know if you can get a brand new float, but
oh really? So, but that one has like a little sticking up more.
that would go down.
That's the down one, and the
That's another
flushes
project
the up.
for you, Ted, man.
These, do not use these. Do not use these. Do not use American wrench and try and
don't
get it on there. You want to use a proper fitting BSF wrench, and then you use this wrench to do that, and just give it a sharp blow, and off it comes. You don't need to put a 6-foot breaker bar or anything off it. You use the adjustable hammer, and
I use a hammer and you got perfect good range.
yeah, exactly. Well, I would have used the hammer, but it's a dead blow, and I don't want a dead blow. I want a sharp steel on steel. If I had a sharp steel on steel, I'd have used that one, but I don't have it right here.
Makes sense to me.
So here we have the high-speed jet. Now there's two covers. You see one is sort of acorn shaped. Depending on the model, it might be acorn shaped or it might have this sort of flat one. The later ones are both acorn shaped, but there is a difference. One good violent blow is better than lots of little taps that just mash things up. You can buy these new nuts from Fines because they're often mashed up. We also, if we're in a rush, can repair them. Oh, I must have been in this carburetor. It's got my gray sealant. If this is all screwed up, we can turn the hex off, slide a piece of brass hex on and solder it in place. But now it fits an American wrench because they don't make Whitworth brass hex. We could also file all the hex, but that's too much work. So if we have to repair it, now the bottom comes off with American wrenches. That is merely a drain, an overflow. Very common thing on these, you shut the car off and a little bit of fuel piddles out. That is normal.
I was going to say, that happens on my car once in a while.
It is normal, because what happens is over driving and everything, a little bit of fuel piles up or condenses down at the bottom, and when you release the vacuum by stopping the car, now that fuel can come out.
I always thought there was something wrong with my float and there was too much in there and it was overflowing.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty normal. Now, if it keeps overflowing, if it's
Oh no,
pumping
yeah,
it out,
then you got something.
that little bit that comes out is basically. Anyway, we'll just take this off because it lets you see things. This is not an air cleaner. There's two purposes for it. One is a carrier plate for the thing that says "Don't fuck with the carburetor," and number two, it's an air silencer. We also jokingly call it a bird filter because it'll filter out things that are sort of the size of a small bird.
It's not a filter,
but it's not a filter. It also carries the crankcase evacuation or crankcase breather. Our jets, okay. The jets are down at the bottom as well. Okay. This one, there's nothing down at the bottom. There is only where the fuel gets sucked up inside.
This end is down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. If you're looking at it here, this being the low-speed jet. The needle part would be right in about there, okay?
Another piece.
A little higher, a little lower, and that is that, which we'll see more. We'll see in more detail in a minute. Low-speed jet is carried by a spring, up at the top, and we haven't removed that spring yet.
But did you take the high-speed jet off already?
We haven't taken that out yet.
No, the cap for it though.
Yeah, the cap is in my hand.
I didn't see a spring though, did I?
There is no spring that you'll see because the spring, see that little triangular plate, and this is a common fault.
Oh yeah, that is, yeah.
This is a common fault that these get absolutely packed with dirt and crud. This has to be able to move up and down because that is the return on your high-speed jet.
Oh,
so,
that spring we were
right, so the high-speed jet, unlike the low-speed jet, sticks out the bottom of the jet tube. So we've looked at the low-speed jet here. The high-speed jet, and by the way, you'll see the feature on here, this little nose with the three. So the three little scallops in there, that's where the fuel flows up, and that's something has to guide the jet, but fuel has to be able to come by as well.
Oh shoot.
High-speed jet. Now if you look at these when they're new, the high-speed jet just disappears down in there, okay? will fall down in. The low-speed jet does not. It sticks up about 70 thou or so, roughly. Okay, if it's really worn and that falls down inside the tube, that's a good sign that your jet tube is worn, and then it's hard to get it lean enough to actually run. But this sits like this, so that would stick up, and
that's where it moves
there's the action of the spring down below.
Oh, right.
Right? And there again is, you can see very tiny gap, but it comes up not too far, and now it's a very big gap. And that's why the taper in the hole is creating a square or a cube relationship of how much fuel is able to come out as it moves up and down. And again, controlled by 14 threads per inch, one reverse thread, one forward thread. There's the threads per inch. That's the reverse thread, right? Counterclockwise to go on. And so you can actually calculate, this moves about 30 degrees. So one third of 1/14 gives you how much technically this moves in inches.
And that little cap with the spring in it, you can take that little ring
Yes.
out to clean that out.
Correct.
I think that's what I did.
Correct. There's a
yeah,
snap
mine wouldn't even
ring.
move. Yeah.
There's a snap. Our starting carburetor right here. Again, a Silver Ghost has a starting carburetor sitting on the manifold. A P1 definitely has one. Some P2s have one, and then they went to the semi-expanding carburetor. Again, this isn't just a little jet. This is a whole carburetor right here. Nice sharp whack, and things come off. Correct BASF wrench. And what we have here is not just a little needle, right, that you'd have with a carburetor, but another little SU type piston that when vacuum comes through, when you open or close this, and there's the passage, and that allows fuel to flow and so forth. The other thing is, this will not work or move or do its carburetor-y thing unless the butterfly is totally closed. That's why for the starting carburetor to work, the throttle side of you have to have both levers down, unlike a Model T, both levers down, throttle closed, allowing airflow and vacuum to come through the starting carb, and retard or late ignition so the engine doesn't kick back. And as soon as the engine fires, you raise up the ignition to get it in the early position to run, and then you ease off the starting carburetor as it warms up, and the regular low-speed jet will take over. As soon as you crack this open, okay, the starting carburetor now just becomes dumping extra fuel.
So it's not a choke, it's a starting.
It's right. It's an enrichener in essence. It is a second carburetor that dumps more fuel. So basically, you open your throttle up and you close the starting carburetor, and it should transition right over to the jets. And if you look down in there, there is yet another jet, which almost never wears out. Okay, so I don't think, other than people like dropping one or mashing it up or going at it with a file, I don't think I've ever had to replace a jet and needle in a starting carburetor. There should be no need. Jet. So,
Oh boy. Yeah. This isn't trivial, is it?
it is if you've done hundreds of them. This just fits in on a taper. You can see the atomizer right there.
Right.
A couple of holes, and if you look at how this works, that goes down in there, and you're adjusting this height to get your starting carburetor. So this has a little spring under it and all of that. I won't take it apart, but all you're really doing is adjusting it in or out until it just starts the car reliably. Your car always started really reliably, so this was pretty much set, and I won't mess with it. I don't want to get a torch down in there because that's brass, and so what I do is take a piece of brass or iron rod or something like that, heat it up red hot, and hold it against the end of the screw, and that warms the screw up enough that with a properly ground hollow ground screwdriver, that should come off. Don't put your carpenter's screwdriver in there. Again, we did the lesson on hollow ground screwdrivers yesterday. Buy screwdrivers, grind them, and have them for specific purposes. That's why I never pass a yard sale without buying the $1 screwdrivers, because you can see all the ends are custom ground to fit very specific screws. And if I need to fit a different screw, I don't care, it's $1. Take this out because it's simple. This barrel is simply the on-off for the starting carburetor. On, off, you can see there's the little circle where it's off, there it is on. It only fits in one way. And this is what connects to the rod that goes on your dash for starting carburetor, on, off. Similarly, this only goes in one place. There's a tiny little pin right there, and there's a tiny little hole right back there. And there's no rocket science at all to this guy. It merely kind of goes together like that, screws together, and it does that. On, off, on, off. So, I think I did put a wrench.
That's not true. You got a friend. I'm your friend. Okay? We know we got one.
I gotta go get this guy apart.
To think these things were designed like in 1910. Can you imagine?
And Henry Royce wasn't really a slide rule kind of guy. He had guys with slide rules. He thought it out in his head and sketched it, and then sent his pattern makers off to make things, and then he'd modify it. Amazing engineering mind, so to speak. It's like putting the flyball governor down inside the ignition with over 100 little tiny pieces to make a flyball governor to advance the ignition. Ford put vacuum on it for 5 cents with a little diaphragm, and vacuum caused the thing to advance or retard. Total different philosophy. Royce could well have said, this vacuum thing's much easier. But no, he already had a flyball governor on it, and he already had this linkage. Don't go back to a blank sheet of paper. Add something to the perfect system to make it more perfect, because then you end up with completely foobar surfaces. These are all nice. There's a little sealant. I'm not even sure that's sealant. I think it's just.
Is that your signature, the sealant?
I put this isn't.
You said you saw your signature someplace.
Yeah, I did on some of these. See the gray sealant right there? That's a gray non-silicon sealant, which we use in large part because you can paint things after using it, and when you use silicon, everything fish eyes and blisters. So we don't use red and black Permatex and all that silicon, because we don't want to start painting a cylinder block and have it fisheye everywhere. So we just use non-silicon sealant. Steve Litton uses a form of red Loctite gasket and doesn't even use paper on things, which we're not big fans of. I like paper gaskets because Henry Royce liked paper gaskets. And that red silicon is, or that red Loctite is basically glue
Why didn't you use a blue Loctite as opposed to?
Well, no, it's not Loctite like a thread locker, it's Loctite like a sealant locker. Because people bend them.
You said that for the low pressure or high pressure?
This is high speed.
High speed, sorry.
Yep, this is the
Do you wear your safety vest?
no. I try not to stab myself. I do it very rarely, though I've been
I'm
working
just a
on
clown, I
been
apologize.
working on my working on cutting my right thumb off now for like a month and a half. I keep trying to find a way to cut it off, which is a shame because I need it for
You need a thumb.
cocking
You need,
pistols and
you
things.
need them both.
So these can be jammed in, by the way. We do not go under with a screwdriver and pry them up if they are jammed. You've got two flats that you can use a wrench on and just wiggle them like that to get it out. And they are often jammed really bad. You can also soak them, etc., etc. Now, what I'm going to do,
about taking things apart.
yeah, if it's jammed, stop, relax.
Yeah.
You've got all the time in the world to worry it off. We are not working in Mr. Goodwrench here where Mrs. Blivets, you know, it's about getting it right, not getting it fast. So here we have the jet coming out the bottom. And in this case, the jet needle is in here. Looks like one of these might be new. Though I'm not sure. One's brass, one's steel for one. Okay, so now we've got this out. We have our new production one from Fines. So what was the fault, or did you just feel it never tuned right? Or?
It was never tuned right, and I could never get it the mixture strong enough. It was always weak.
Strong enough.
Yes,
okay.
it was always weak.
Interesting. Okay. So again, you can see this has just a very tiny little bit of movement in it.
Sideways.
Little sideways movement. This has more, but it isn't so much more that I'd necessarily condemn. This. But since you already paid for the parts, we'll put them in, and maybe this one will come in good use. And
You said one is brass and one is steel?
yeah,
Should they
but
both
some
be the
of
same
them,
metal?
no. Back in the day, they made some in brass, some in steel. So we can also look up inside the tube. And see that that's nice and clean. And nothing hangs up or jams. So that does exactly what it's supposed to do. It really doesn't have significant play in it. You can compare the two.
There's alignment mark.
There's an alignment mark. Okay, you see the alignment mark right
Yep.
there? Scribed so that knob and the top of that post are just in alignment.
Is that a factory scribe or is that something you?
That is a factory scribe. So after the carburetor is set at the factory, the car is ready to ship. One of the last things that the tuner, setter, or whatever did was took a... Yeah. Also, when you do it, run your finger across the top. That would tell a mechanic at Rolls-Royce instantly, right, if it's off, that somebody wasn't reading the instruction manual so conveniently provided on the carburetor.
It's so beautifully done too. Look at that.
Right.
That's hard to read.
That's art right there.
So what year
Just
was
in the
that
writing.
scribe done?
Isn't that beautiful?
What year is your car?
33.
33. When was it? When was the guarantee issued?
It says you butt heads don't touch nothing.
November 33.
Butt heads
This would have
don't
been
touch
done in
nothing.
November 1933
Yeah.
by
When
a guy.
it was finally commissioned.
And And it might not have actually been at Derby. It could well have been at the coach builders when they went out to inspect the body and approve it. Now, because this rod right here is new, or not new, and that'll stay permanent, but this will be new, and it would obviously change based on the position of and thickness of, you see up there's an aluminum washer up inside there. That can also be a red fiber washer. They have a thickness or a set of thicknesses to them, and the thickness or thicknesses control the height of your jet tube. You put in a thick one, the jet tube's lower. You put in a thin one, the jet tube's higher. You put in none, and the jet tube's really high. What that means is that the jet tube, which sits in a very specific position. So if I put this back in, the jet tube is in a very specific position. You can see the two jet tubes right there, the big and the small, the low speed and the high speed, right? So one position that it has to sit in very exactly, if you look right here, you see the two holes right here that lead from the carburetor float.
Oh, there.
Right? You see the two holes going from where the float chamber is? Okay. Two holes right there. One hole for each jet. They go through a passageway, and those two holes end right there. So where are they? They're right at the bottom of the jet, right? See the hole right there? The hole right there.
On an angle,
Yeah, they're a very nice angle that just lets you clear the other side of the float chamber.
So fuel's sitting there the whole time then?
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
fuel,
yeah.
but it's not just sitting there. Whatever height your fuel is in here, which is set by the position of your needle and by the floating of the float, right? When does it shut off? Sets where the fuel is in this tube, right? So again, when you've all seen, U-shaped science experiments where that this has to be in. That when I talk about this, I'm talking about the very top of the needle. Everybody's familiar with the Venturi effect, right? Okay, the Venturi effect. It's what makes carburetors work. It's what makes wings work. The Venturi effect is so float comes up, right? Float comes up, needle goes down. It's kind of hard to see because the needle moves 3 times the velocity of the
and it's moving inversely to the float, yeah.
Right, but it moves inversely to the float. But the float comes up and pushes the needle down, and it's all controlled by the proportional of the distance from here to here and here to here. How
when
much
you
it does
replace
it.
the seat and the needle, how do you? The seat is easy, you know how to put that back in with the right washer, but how do you know how long that's supposed to be when you solder
That's
that
where
back
you've
on?
got to. That's where you've got to either have one of these that you've milled holes in so that you can look at the height, or you can assemble it, put this into a jig and put one of those across it,
Right.
and get it level to where you want it, and now you can look down in the tops of your jets when it's filled with gasoline and
So you put your floating all back in here, and then you look down in there to see where the gas is.
you pour gas in,
Yeah.
you plug it off and pour gas in, and then you can get your level. Of course, you're going to want to have your starting carb back in there and sort of everything plugged up. Top of the jet tube to the top of the tulip, right? Top of the tulip to there. Do some subtraction, whatever the magic. Now we've got a measurement to here. and we can measure how far we want to go down
Where the
into
float,
tube,
where the level should be.
where the level should be, and with a cap that has holes cut in it, now you can measure down to the surface of the fuel right there and set it up and make it happen. And this has got some wear in it. Compare the new one with the old one.
Yeah.
See, your old one is down a little lower. It is not egregious. I would not.
Right.
The idea of recognizing that fuel and airflow was not necessarily linear, and that you wanted more as RPMs increased, but not in a direct line. Otherwise, these would be a straight angle, or it would be nothing, right? Because once you reach this point, now it's linear.
Yeah.
He figured that out without really even a slide rule. This was just in his head.
In other words, he went from straight all the way up to angling off like that?
Right. If it had been straight all the way, it would open, and there would be open and fuel. But
Move too fast.
down between here and here, and you see how far that actually goes. But in this first phase, the power phase where the vacuum is sort of down here, you've got this absolutely brilliant metering of fuel proportional with exactly what the engine needs.